I'm a big wimp. I might literally faint if I see blood or gory imagery or just read or overhear about somebody getting badly hurt. It's a bit hard to put into words. I can kind of see myself in there on the scene. Imagine the horrible suffering, sharing it. The feeling swallows me deeper and deeper until there's nothing but darkness. Unless I somehow manage to shake myself out of it. But sometimes even a wimp is in the mood for queer horror games. There's a good supply of them, and I heard that they can be really good too. And we have the spooky season every year and stuff. Also, it's not like I can't take any horror at all. It's mainly just the bloody and cool variety that I can't. So, I decided to give the genre a real try, despite my condition, and play 3 Yuri horror games. I don't want to spoil the games in case you want to give them a try yourself. Instead, I'll discuss how I like them on a more general level. I also want to discuss content warnings from the perspective of being a wimp. Because it turns out that sometimes the warnings can be much more intimidating than the games themselves. Anyway, let's talk horror games and lesbians. 3 Lilies and Their Ghost Stories is a set of 3 ghost stories in one visual novel, as well as 3 different takes on horror and 3 different relationships between women. When you go download the game or start playing it, you're presented with a very prominent list of content warnings, basically nasty sounding stuff like suicide, death, bullying, vomiting, terminal illness and climate change speculation. Being a huge wimp, I was immediately fixated on the content warning list and assumed that the game is surely too yikes for me. But my patrons assured me that the content isn't anywhere as intense as I was fearing, so I decided to give it a try. The first of the 3 stories in the game is Lily of the Countryside. It's a more traditional feeling ghost story about a haunted village of sorts. It was heavy on mystery and left quite a bit of room for speculation on what exactly happened. I actually kind of liked it. Nothing about it was even close to too intense for me. In a way, it was even a bit sweet. The second story, Lily of the Suburb, was very much my cup of tea, with the characters trapped in a twisted copy of their own world, and the fascinating psychological angle thrown to the mix. It reminded me of Lovecraftian horror. I was really hyped to play this one, so atmospheric and touching, with sweet relationship dynamics as a cherry on top. The last story of the 3, Lily of the City, was a thrilling ghost story about impossible things starting to happen in a futuristic nuclear plant that you are responsible for maintaining. The story was more unsettling in the "there are dead people here" kind of sense, but I was fine since they didn't dwell on the deaths or the corpses. I had good time enjoying the atmosphere and the thrilling moments. Overall, I was positively surprised. I could totally get behind this kind of horror. I'm a big fan of atmospheric stories, and horror definitely aligns with that in a sense. As long as it's nothing too intense, I found myself happy to enjoy the vibes, especially with the sweet couples and character dynamics on top of it. So maybe horror, at least the tame variety, could be my thing. But it's actually pretty hard to find the kind of horror I'm compatible with. Queer games are typically very thorough about their content warnings, which is nice, but it's also a bit tricky to decipher what the content warnings mean in practice. When you're a wimp prone to fainting, it's easy to imagine that the game is chock full of all these yikes things in their prime form. But even then, you do want the content warning list to be there, don't you? Meet girl. Your roommate has gone missing. You're not incapacitated anymore, so you go search her. You find a strange girl in the woods. And there's probably meat in the game. That's about as much as you can gather when you pick up Meet Girl. No content warnings, just play at your own risk, I guess. I actually kind of like the approach of not telling the player too much about what they are about to play. It makes sense for horror in particular. But it's a bit of an issue when it comes to my own limitations about horror. I had no intel from my patrons, so I resorted to reading comments before playing. After all, the risk of spoilers is better than not being able to play at all. Thankfully, I mostly just saw praise for how touching and relatable the game was, so unless all these gamers are tormented beyond belief in real life, surely the game can't be too gruesome, right? Luckily, the game really isn't the type that's trying to shock you. Sure, it's unsettling because of the meat thing, but I think it's meant more as an allegory than a scare. It was actually pretty nice. The game is kind of trippy and puzzling, but you can still see what it's trying to say about mental illness, love and stuff. Short, quirky, bittersweet. I'm glad I found the courage to play it. As for content warnings, well, does your average horror enthusiast want to feel safe when playing horror anyway? Probably not. Does it matter if wimps can't play it? Not really, I guess. So, I guess it's valid to basically be like, it's horror, play at your own risk. The game is doing good numbers on it, so it seems to work after all. Content warnings are a bit troublesome anyway, especially for short games like this. To a degree, they are spoilers, and I guess it takes away some of the tension when you know nothing particularly bad happens before you even start the game. So, I can see reasons to omit the warnings. I wouldn't myself, but still, I don't mean to criticize the developer. The Final Prize is Soup is a survival horror visual novel about participating to a terrifying game in the afterlife in hopes of being given a second chance in life. When you go to the game page, you are greeted with a huge, prominent list of content warnings: violence, blood, death, jump scares, cannibalism, child abuse, human sacrifice, monsters, domestic violence, alcohol, drowning, fire, and snakes. So yeah, this was the most horror kind of horror I played. As you can probably guess, my initial reaction was that there's just no way I can play this. There are so many warnings, and there are big yikes like cannibalism, human sacrifice, and yes, blood too. But again, my trusty patron said that it's really good and not all that intense, so I decided to give it a try. And oh my, I was glad I did. The game had an incredible atmosphere, and the mystery and drama kept me hooked all the way through the story. The romance was surprisingly sweet and touching too. I kind of struggled more with being soppy than horrified, and most of the time I was just plain hyped. Of all the things, the X-drama in the game hurt me more than the horror. There were some tough scenes though. One scene was tough because of its detailed description of injury and the stuff happening after that. It was on the level where I was starting to feel how awful it must have been to be in that situation. But thankfully there was no focus on blood, and the scene didn't last for too long, so I was fine enough. Another scene I struggled with was one where a character was portrayed bleeding badly, which is fair enough because blood was amongst the content warnings. It could have been bad, but I was thankfully prepared and knew to just look at the text box and nothing else. I was thinking of covering the part of the screen with my hand too, if it got too bad, but thankfully the scene didn't last that long. Apart from those scenes, I could deal with the horror pretty well. Although people were certainly dying and stuff, the developers were considerate enough to make nasty stuff happen off camera or just leave it on mention level. I could mostly brush things off like, well, out of sight, out of mind. Anyway, tough scenes aside, the game was incredible. A huge thumbs up from me. Got to love Mimi's route. But well, let's talk content warnings again. The Final Prize Soup had a ton prominently displayed at the top of the game page. And I guess technically everything in the list does happen. It's really accurate. But looking at the huge list easily gives a wimp like me a wrong impression about the game as a whole. Like, the game is decently long, with a lot of things going. On one hand, there are scary things here and there, and on the other, there are just plain sweet moments that make you forget it even is horror. But when you see warnings like cannibalism and human sacrifice at the top of the page, you easily go like, whoa, yikes. And yeah, I guess the cannibalism thing does happen, but how to put it? It's not what you expect when you hear the word, like being eaten alive in some gruesome way or something. What actually happens is relatively tame compared to that. I don't mean to criticize the game though. There are people who will absolutely benefit from the warnings being there. People who can't take certain things at all. What this experience has taught me is that sometimes content warnings lack nuance. They tell you that there are things, but not how intense those things are. Like casually cutting your finger a bit is very different from some more lethal kind of blood related incidents, even though I have fainted a couple of times in my life for seeing very mild kind of finger injury, but you know what I mean. Kind of in the same vein, it's hard to tell how frequently the yikes things happen. Does cannibalism on the list mean it's a one-off incident, or does the whole game revolve around it? Same with death. It happening once off camera and people dropping like flies all the time are two different matters. When you're a wimp, you easily assume the worst just to be on the safe side. You kind of just look at the content warnings and try to imagine how bad it could be. And it's easy to imagine it being bad because, well, that would be peak horror, right? What can you do as a developer though? You want the warnings to be there for people who can't take certain topics at all. And it really just isn't practical to go into details about what the warnings mean exactly. Going like that off camera is just janky and makes the warnings list hard to read and take way too much space. Trying to put the warnings into tiers based on intensity could maybe work, but where does the line even go between the tiers? It sounds kind of impractical too. I don't know if I have a good solution to offer either, but what I have found helpful is knowing what the intention of the developer is. Something along the lines of a simple, we don't intend to suck you, below the content warning list would go a long way to help me. Or something like, prepare for rough time if the game is really not intended for wimps. I guess I basically just want to know if you made the game horror for vibes, or if you're actually in the business of making me faint. Well, not that you need to cater to me in reality. These are just random thoughts I had. Well, anyway, that was my experience with Yuri Horror so far. It was great. Such good games. I enjoyed it way more than I thought. Maybe I'll play more horror in the future, like on the Halloween or something. So, that's it for the... Wait a minute, what's this article on Wikipedia? Reflex syncope is a brief loss of consciousness due to neurologically induced drop in blood pressure or heart rate. That is to say, there's a medical condition for fainting when you see or feel certain things. It's typically triggered by pain, emotional stress, the sight of blood, fear of needles. Oh. Treatment. Just avoid getting triggered, LOL. Occurrence. 1 in 1,000 people or something. Oh, I kind of guessed I was pretty alone with this fainting thing. But who would have thought that I were such an unlikely snowflake?